It's just one example how manipulating material is presented with the even title of the presentation. It was 1% from Ukrainian and 99 from Russian. But when you present 5 and 5, it's like equal play, you see? And it's manipulation.
The risk that such reports lending itself to misleading information becomes dangerous for Ukraine is high.
Hello and welcome to Ukrainian Flames, a special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic Course. My name is Anton Pechenkin, and today we'll talk about Amnesty International and how human rights organizations play along with Russia. If you want to know more, please subscribe to our channel to stay tuned and support us with your likes and commentaries. We read attentively every one of them. Ukraine keeps fighting the full-scale Russian invasion and holding its armed shield not only to protect itself, but the whole Eastern and Central Europe and the whole world against the Moscow's aggressive expansionism and imperialism. Many thousands of Ukrainian soldiers died defending their homeland. Tens of thousands of civilians became victims of this ruthless aggression. And of course, such lasting and desperate Ukrainian resistance wouldn't be possible without the wide-scale help by weapons and other resources from the Western countries. However, not everyone on the West understands the heavy conditions in which Ukrainian fighters operate in. Of course, there always must be a place for criticism, but only for the fair and just one. Amnesty International, a world-known human rights organization, seems to amnesty itself from the obligation of fairness and justice. On August 4, it published a report in which it blamed the Ukrainian army for violating the laws of war and endangering its own civilians. Key arguments: Ukrainian army set up bases in the residential areas, including schools and hospitals, and launched attacks from there. And by the end, they put a disclaimer: well, okay, that still does not justify the Russian crimes. Even with this disclaimer, Amnesty's report infuriated Ukrainian society and its friends abroad for the flagrant blindness about the situation in the country and extremely poor field work. A list of counter-arguments became very long. Ukrainian army is protecting these civil areas from repeating of Bucha. There are no students in these schools. People in the military uniform are now everywhere in Ukraine, and that doesn't make all the streets, shops, parks and hospitals a legitimate aim for Russian bombing. Last but not least, there are a lot of questions about the methodology and sources of Amnesty's research. All their respondents are anonymous, without even naming the specific cities or villages where they do live. At least part of such evidences was made in Russian filtration camps. The people were ready to say literally anything to safely escape from under control of the Russian military. In response to all these critics, Amnesty International Secretary General Agnes Kalamar dismissed all outraged Ukrainians, addressing her as mobs and trolls. The organization still insists on its conclusions, however, expresses sorry for distress and anger provided to Ukrainians. As a result, head of the Organization of Ukrainian Department of the Amnesty International quitted together with all the office. Oleksandr Pavlichenko, executive director of the Ukrainian Helsinki Human Rights Union, explains the reflections of the Ukrainian human rights activists on this situation.
It's not the first case when the Amnesty International is under the focus of criticism from Ukrainian side or from human rights organizations from Ukraine. And I may just remind on the report on illegal detention places that was prepared by the Amnesty International in 2016, 2015, 2016 on the situation with the forced disappearances and illegal deprivation of liberty by both Ukrainian special forces and Russian proxy in Donetsk and Lugansk region. And it was not proportionally and also deviate the fair picture of the situation that was at this time in Ukraine, especially with this phenomena, forced disappearance and illegal detention.
In his second piece of speech, Oleksandr Pavlichenko reflects how does this situation threaten Ukraine and what can be done to address it.
This information that was announced as the prepared report played its role and its negative role with the accusation of Ukrainian side at the guilty side in the international humanitarian law commitments, and the aim of such information should be also considered. And as to me, the Amnesty International made not very proper presentation of material, and the consequences of this, let's say, non-prudent attitude towards the monitoring and presentation of the situation, and with the accusation of one of the sides, and if we may reconsider even the alleged cases of violations, we may not find the proper proved situations that might be investigated and properly prosecuted. So I see the two at least conclusions. All the sides in this war should be prudent and take into account the exigency to fulfill the requirement of obligations of international humanitarian law. It's obviously. And Ukrainian side should be ready to study, consider, investigate, and prosecute the perpetrators of such cases. But this report, as to me, is not the, let's say, true material that present the situation as it is, and we reconsider all the cases, and I may tell that we may rely on the deep investigations and monitor in the situation with the medical establishment, and in such cases was no one alleged case of presence and violations by Ukrainian side of the international humanitarian law, and the presented in this press announce, because we have not read the report of Amnesty International, only this press announce information and materials indicated that it was at least 5 alleged cases of presence of, as they call it, military bases in the hospitals. But any military basis was and is in the hospital. So it's just one example how manipulating material is presented with the even title of the presentation. So I think that it will be the let's say, the bad story for the Amnesty International. We will see what will happen with the organization and with the further presence of members of this organization in Ukraine. And for Ukraine, I don't think that it will be the bad story. We just check, let's say, the level of the sanity of Ukrainian forces and how the IHL standards are fulfilled and exist in the reality in this war from Ukrainian side.
Oleksandr Pavlichenko also mentions that this case wasn't the only example of Amnesty International's manipulations concerning Ukraine. Let's listen about the other vivid situations.
Just one example that was mentioned with the presentation of the report on the illegally detained person in Ukraine and on non-controlled territories. Well, the non-proper presentation was due to the fact that in this report, Amnesty International presented exactly equal number of the cases. It was I don't remember exactly, 5 to 5 or 10 to 10. So 10 cases from Ukrainian side and 10 cases from Russian side, or 5 to 5. But the reality was that all cases from Ukrainian side was investigated and they were well known. But from occupied territories, it was just seldom information, non-investigated at all, and without the proper access to the places where the detained persons were held. And it's totally different, let's say, proportion between this presence of such cases in the practice of both sides. It was 1% from Ukrainian and 99% from Russian. But when you present 5 and 5, it's like equal play, you see, and it's manipulation. So it's just one example how it works. And you present it like, let's say, similar business, 50 to 50 to both parties. Yes, it exists, but it's exemptions here and routine practice on this side. And here, 5 cases and 500 cases, but you take this 5 and only 5 from other side. So how manipulation works?
Amnesty's blaming of the victim of the Ukrainian side spread concerns not only among Ukrainian human rights activists, but also in the global community. Our last speaker for today is Eleonora Monghelli, the Vice President of the Italian Federation for Human Rights. Eleonora, with clear arguments, dismissed the scandalous Amnesty report and also referred to the previous such examples, as Vitaly Markiv's case. Let's listen to her.
First of all, it's important to remind how difficult it is to conduct independent and accurate investigations in conflict-affected areas in order to document, on the basis of credible evidence, acts which may constitute breaches of the international law. And it is even harder when the context is that of an invasion of a sovereign state. So we need to contextualize and to make always clear that there is a Russian military aggression against Ukraine, and that according to the international law, Russia is the aggressor and Ukraine is the victim. Of course, investigations must include alleged violations of all parties, and Ukraine has the obligation to protect civilians. But coming to the Amnesty International's report, which states that Ukrainian fighting tactics are endangering civilians, it seems that this important contextualization is missing. There is a clear lack of an in-depth research when they say that Ukrainian forces have put civilians in harm's way by establishing bases and operating weapons systems in populating residential areas. Of course, civilians may never be the deliberate target of attacks, and that's not the point. because a key element was not considered in that report, and this is the principle of military necessity, which, like the related principle of proportionality, is an essential component of the international humanitarian law. So what is missing here is a correct assessment, which can also be made with the help of military experts on the ground, of the necessity of the Ukrainian armed forces. And this is crucial in this specific context, given the Ukrainian position of lawful self-defense on its own territory, and also considering that the process of evacuation is extremely complicated for Ukraine. Do not forget that Russia demonstrated not to care about civilians when using them as a human shield and shelling humanitarian corridors. It is worth also remembering that Ukraine has never denied international investigation on its own territory. For example, although Ukraine is not a state party to the Rome Statute, it has accepted twice the International Criminal Court's jurisdiction over alleged crimes occurring on its territory from both parties. So in view of this, the risk that such report lending itself to misleading information becomes dangerous for Ukraine is high, even more so if we consider how this content has been made public with tweets and statements which are already being used and manipulated by the Kremlin propaganda. We have seen a similar method applied to the market case, when in Italy we were the only human rights organization asking for the respect of the rule of law and denouncing the presence of factual mistakes during the first judicial proceeding and the inconsistency of the accusations as a result of Russian narratives permeated in the court. So I think that the big problem here is the method, and it can be overcome only by leaving all ideologies behind with an accurate verification of facts and with the support of experts during the investigations.
You have been watching this special project by Ukraine Media Center and NGO Euro-Atlantic course dedicated to the Russia-Ukraine war, Ukraine in Flames. In description there is also information how personally you can help Ukraine in our struggle against Russian aggression, and if you find our job interesting and useful, please like and share this video. Thank you for watching, and everything is gonna be Ukraine.